10-Minute University program is a program of Clackamas County Master Gardener Association offered in collaboration with and in support of OSU Extension Service Master Gardener Program. At our website, you will find handouts, videos on upcoming classes and workshops. And our program is volunteer-led, and we are supported by OSU faculty to ensure the quality of our content. Let's get started. Spring is the season that symbolizes starting fresh and starting over. It is the season during which the natural world revives after the colder winter months. During spring, dormant plants begin to grow up and new seedlings sprout out of the ground. It's the pleasure of anticipation, that quiet moment that you've been waiting for all winter. And here we go. These are the topics we're going to discuss today. We're going to consider the effects of climate change on your garden, learn when to start working in your spring ornamental garden and what to do initially, learn about ornamental plants, learn to identify weeds in your garden and how to control them, discover how to prepare your garden beds for planting, learn how to dig a hole and plant a plant, learn what to do with spring lawn care, and slugs and snails. In most years, the Portland daily average maximum temperature for the Willamette Valley in April is 62 degrees Fahrenheit. The minimum temperature is usually around 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost is very rare, but I don't think this April is going to be like that. We are going to be colder. And you can see that we average about 3 inches of rain in April. Theoretically, the days continue to warm steadily during April. We'll see. Weather is short term. It's minutes to months. And it covers temperature, humidity, precipitation, wind, rain. Climate is the average weather over time, decades or centuries. The historical climate of the Northwest is, interestingly, Mediterranean, because we have dry, hot summers and cold and rainy winters. The hardiness zone for Oregon, and specifically our Willamette Valley, defines the ability to withstand the minimum sustained temperatures of the zone. When I became a master gardener in 1992, we were classified as Zone 7, which meant that our plants could cope with a temperature of 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we are classified as Zone 8, 8A and 8B. That means there's been a warming trend, and now the plants can sustain a minimum temperature of 15 to 20 degrees. So with the onset of climate change, the temperatures of a region may change faster than the data can be compiled and analyzed. There is definitely a warming trend in the Willamette Valley. Large bodies of water, urban heat islands, mountains, and valleys can influence the surrounding climate and growing conditions. So while the U.S. growing zones have indicated the cold hardiness of plants, now the experts are considering adding a heat hardiness classification to the growing zones for the hardiness zones. This will affect the planting dates for growing plants. Also, your garden can have microclimates or microzones in which significantly impact the hardiness of plants. So the microzones are influenced by sun exposure, existing plants, nearby structures, and low areas where cold can settle. Tree canopies, overhangs, arbors, and fences also create microclimates or microzones in your landscape. We've all seen in the past few years that aberrant freezing and snow patterns are affecting us. So evergreen shrubs are vulnerable to snow load. Freezing rain especially can damage big trees. Spring is the best of times and is the worst of times. The nurseries are beginning to fill with new plants. We get a few warm days and we're ready to go. And everything smells so wonderful. And people have been reading catalogs all winter and they're ready to get out. And yet, depending on what is happening with our weather, it could be the worst time to start working in your garden and destroying the soil tilth. So wait until the soil is no longer wet enough to form a ball in your hand before you walk on it and compact the soil. You can start your cleanup now before the old growth gets tangled up in the new growth that's coming up. Remove old annuals if you didn't do it in the fall. It's a great time to divide and transplant your plants. And it's a great time to stake plants. So if you know where your peony is or your dahlia, if you can remember, you put around the staking now, then you won't have to fight the plant in midsummer when you're trying to put in all the leaves and the branches back inside the staking. Many perennials prefer to be left standing throughout the winter for extra protection. They protect the basal growth of that plant. So if you did leave your perennial standing last fall, once you start seeing new growth come up, then you can remove the winter mulch and cut down the dry stalks, and you cut them down to the ground. Time to prepare and prime irrigation system for summer. Weeding. The mantra should be proactive weeding. Damp soil makes it easier to pull young weeds. Don't compost your weeds. Normally, our home garden compost does not get hot enough to kill the weed seeds in the compost. Annual weeds grow one season, so remove them before they have set seed or compete with the plants coming in. Perennial weeds live many years, so dig them up or kill them with an herbicide. Bittercress, which is at the bottom right-hand corner, is the weed I have the most, and I've already filled 3 buckets of weeds, bittercress. I heard this saying when I was at a seminar in Seattle a few years ago, and it's true. A horticulturist at Oregon State University said, if you combine the longevity of seeds in the soil with the fact that weeds such as common lamb's quarters can produce over 500,000 seeds per plant, the incentive to hand weed your garden becomes even greater. Scientists have found lotus seeds in Manchuria when they were doing an excavation of a tomb. And they took those lotus seeds out and they germinated after 1,000 years. So weed often, weed early, so that weeds don't get a foothold. You want to keep weeds from going to seed. That's your whole goal. There's a garden saying that 1 year of weeds equals 7 years of hoeing. And if you look at the picture in the lower right-hand corner, that's my favorite tool for digging out weeds. It's called a scuffle hoe or also a stirrup hoe. And you just drag that hoe along the bottom of along your garden, about 1 inch deep, and it pulls up the weeds and the roots. And then you can take them elsewhere. Weeds are dispersed through wind, water, birds, animal, insects, humans. For example, if you go walking in a field or in someone else's garden lawn that has a lot of seeds, you can bring them home on your clothing or in your shoes. And if you mow and you mow weed seeds, then they're transferred throughout the rest of your lawn. A dandelion seed can travel up to 30 feet with the wind. So in Master Gardeners, we are taught integrated pest management. That means you go from least toxic to most toxic in the control of a pest. So you use the most toxic as the herbicides as a last resort. Be sure to follow the instructions on the label. They will tell you when to use it, how to use it, what type of plant it works on, and what type of herbicide it is. For example, a pre-emergent herbicide are used before weeds sprout. Post-emergent herbicides are used after weeds come up. Selective herbicides control certain plants and not others. Non-selective herbicides potentially can damage many plants. Systemic herbicides move from point of initial application to other parts of the plant. For example, if you spray it on a leaf, it will go down to the root and kill the root, and then that kills the weed. Non-systemic or contact herbicides affect only the plant they touch. Help store carbon by keeping soils covered with a diversity of plants. Improve soil health by adding organic matter and disturbing the soil as little as possible. And you can make compost from yard waste and food scraps. Making your own compost means you know that there are no weed seeds, disease plants, or chemicals. You can compost grass clippings, except if you have used a weed and feed on the grass or another herbicide. Compost provides a source of microorganisms, slow renews nutrients, it feeds bacteria and earthworms, retains soil moisture, and reduces erosion. So how do you use compost? To amend the soil, you can mix 2 to 5 inches of compost into your flower gardens before planting and use a spade. You can top dress a lawn with compost, and it's recommended this provides a slow release of nitrogen into your garden soil. So you mix finely sifted soil with sand and then top dress your lawn with it. Adding compost increases the activity of soil organisms. They help to provide nutrients to your plants over time. Incorporate generous amounts of organic materials and amendments using the results of the soil analysis as a guide. Prepare raised beds in areas where cold soil and drainage are a continuing problem. Incorporate generous amounts, at least 2 inches of organic materials, and spade them in. Spring is the time to plant or transplant. So good gardening soil warms early in the spring, is loamy enough to provide oxygen to the roots of the growing plants, holds water for several days, and is fertile enough to grow plants. Loamy soil, also known as loam, L-O-A-M, is one of the 3 basic kinds of soil. It is fertile, rich soil with an equal amount of sand and silt, and to a lesser degree, some clay. Early warming is directly related mainly to drainage. Poorly drained soil remains wet and cold late into the season, making it difficult to grow early season plantings. If your soil is heavy and wet long after the rains have stopped, you can consider using a raised bed or drainage material. Raised beds will warm earlier and also be better drained. This is my friend's garden, and when she moved into this house, it had an abundance of 20 to 30-year-old plants. So she removed them all, and this is her garden 3 to 4 years later. That reflects her. So to prepare a new bed, you remove all the planting material that's there as soon as the soil can be worked. Remove weeds, sod, debris, rocks. Then you spread a layer of 4-inch compost or well-rotted manure and any amendments over the soil and cultivate it to a depth of 10 to 12 inches with a spading fork. And you want to go that deep because that's where the roots of your perennials and your shrubs will be. Jory helped my friend with the planting. So now the bed is ready, and now we're ready to talk about the plant. So take the plant out of the container, hose off all the container media until the roots are bare. Once you see the roots, prune off any root that is damaged or dead or is pointed in the wrong direction, including ones that grow in a circle and cannot be straightened. So see these roots, how they go around in a circle? You want to remove those. This is usually an indication that the plant was in the container too long. Removing the container media and pruning or straightening the roots as needed helps the plant become established in the soil. Sometimes when you take that plant out of the container, you see a thick mat at the bottom. Again, it means the plant was in the container for a long time. So take a knife, whatever other implement you want, and slice it right off. It does not hurt the roots and it does not hurt the plant. So we have a clean bed, we have a plant with all the roots exposed, and now we're ready to dig the hole. So you dig a hole twice as wide as the root ball and only as deep as the root ball, and save that excavated soil. So then you put back some of that soil and you create a mound and you put the plant on top of that mound and spread out the roots so that it looks like a starfish. And you want to make sure that the crown of the plant, which is where the stem meets the roots, that's called the crown, is at the ground level or just above it. Then you start putting in the excavated soil, water it, tamp it down a little bit, and then repeat the process until the soil in the hole is at the same level of the ground soil. Soil is most susceptible to compaction when it's saturated and cannot absorb any more water. That's when the pooling starts on top of the ground. Plants can intercept raindrops and prevent the soil from compacting and sealing. So you want to avoid walking on wet soil, working with wet soil. If you must walk in your garden bed, say you have a garden bed that's 6 to 8 feet wide, then put in stepping stones so that you can get back there and work, or maybe make a little path so that you can work in there without stepping on the garden soil. In the graphic on the left are the air and water pores. These are essential to the roots and the microorganisms that live in the soil. You can see when it's compacted, there's very little room for water and air to move. Organic mulches means basically anything that was alive, like bark chips from a tree, straw, leaves, or manure. So your plant is in the ground and you're ready to mulch. For best oxygen and water movement, mulches should be coarse and chunky so that you have those air and water pores. Sawdust and fine compost, for example, are too finely textured to allow for gas transfer, air and carbon dioxide, and water movement. Plus, weeds really like compost and they establish easily. When you're only using compost as a mulch, it can dry out and it forms a crust. It's called hydrophobic, which means it repels water. Yard waste compost usually has chunky parts in it. They can help with that air and water movement. Organic mulches help to conserve moisture, suppress weeds, improve the soil as they decompose, and moderate soil temperature. So after planting is when you put mulch around if you want. You mulch up to within about 4 inches of the crown of the plant. You don't want to smother the crown. Stake trees and large shrubs if needed. Fertilize if needed. and prune only dead, diseased, and damaged limbs. You want the plant's energy to be forming roots right now. You don't want the plant to feel like it has to put on new growth above ground. Watering the first year. After I finish a landscape design for clients, we have the water talk. And most plants seem to die after a new landscape is put in from lack of enough water. So water new plantings enough in the first weeks to keep the roots moist, but not soggy. And you can use a water meter that you do use with houseplants. You can stick that in the ground outside and see how wet your plant really is. Watering frequency varies with your soil, the climate, and your plant. Proper watering helps plants develop robust root systems that are better able to absorb water and nutrients from a larger area. Then over time, you can gradually reduce the frequency of watering so you're watering thoroughly but less often. And now we're going to talk about plants. Linda Chalker-Scott is an associate professor of horticulture and extension specialist at Washington State University. She's co-host of the Garden Professor's blog and author of numerous books, including The Informed Gardener and How Plants Work, the science behind the amazing things plants do. Landscapes with more plant diversity are more resilient when it comes to facing new pest and disease pressures and changes in the environment, such as extreme drought and heat. More plant diversity in your garden will support pollinators and beneficial insects that provide essential services like pest management and decomposition. Native plants generally require less water and fertilizer and provide essential food and shelter for plant wildlife. Plants help store carbon and minimize soil erosion. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants convert carbon dioxide into their food by using energy derived from the sun. The most essential elements of photosynthesis are sunlight, water, carbon dioxide, and chlorophyll. So when a plant performs photosynthesis, it consumes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and releases carbon into the soil. This process is called carbon sequestration. Plant roots hold sediment in place, helping to stabilize areas where they are planted. By absorbing water, they break the impact of raindrops and physically slow the speed and diffuse the flow of overland runoff, thereby reducing runoff erosion. So the photo labeled A is a native plant called Iris tenax. B is a vine maple, and C is a western azalea, and D is a flowering currant called ribes. These are all native plants that bloom in the spring. You can have self-sowing plants that set seed in the fall. So after the seedlings come up in the spring, thin the patch to, sorry, my dog is talking, allow survival of the fittest, and to sculpt a color line in your garden bed. Sweet peas, sunflowers, columbine, annual delphiniums, poppies, calendula, which I use instead of marigolds because the calendula comes back every year. Nasturtiums, clarkia, alyssums, and even petunias can come back year after year. Annual herbs like dill, fennel, and cilantro also come back year after year if you leave the seed head on the plant. Depending on what April does, if it ever warms up, we can take geraniums, begonias, and fuchsias from storage. You water and fertilize them, cut back any dead or damaged growth that you see, and move outdoors maybe. Maybe May would be better this year. you can start tuberous begonias. So you can plant insectary plants to bring insects to the garden. And some examples are alyssum, coriander, candy tuft, which is already blooming, sunflower, yarrow, and dill. Cover your transplants to protect them against late spring frost, and we are still experiencing that. When selecting new roses, choose plants labeled for resistance to diseases. Plant dahlias, gladioli, and tuberous begonias in mid-May. Plant chrysanthemums for fall color. So prune spring flowering shrubs after blossoms fade. And some examples of spring blooming shrubs are daphne, camellia, rhododendrons, azaleas, and lilacs. And the reason that you want to do that is they set bloom 3 weeks to 4 weeks after the end of bloom. So if you prune, for example, in midsummer, you could possibly be taking off all the blooms for next year. Summer plants, as a general rule, bloom on new growth. So you can prune those right now in spring, but it's important to know the name of your plant and its habits. This Daphne is called Daphne burkwoodii carolmacki, and I love it because it's got those great variegated flowers, and the blooms are so fragrant. It gets about 3 by 4, and it blooms in mid-spring. Time to divide: grasses, hostas, daylilies, mums. So the daylily is called wild horses, and it's herbaceous. When you have a plant, an evergreen plant has a woody top growth, and the leaves stay on all year round. A deciduous plant has a woody top growth, and the leaves fall off in the fall. An herbaceous plant has a soft top growth, and it dies completely back to the ground. So in the in the spring, you get this brand new plant coming up, and it doesn't have any winter damage. It's great. So B is an evergreen grass called Acorus ogon. And a common name is sweet flag grass. It's if you see ogon in the name of a plant, it usually means yellow. The hosta is called first frost. It's also herbaceous. It's gorgeous. It grows about 16 inches tall and 24 inches wide. Lawn care. Maintaining an attractive lawn is both functional and beneficial to the urban environment, and is easier than you might think. Lawns are a valuable way to conserve soil, reduce runoff, reduce urban heat loads, and sequester atmospheric carbon, like we talked about before. So a new lawn has uniform color, it's dense and lush, and you get to choose the type of grass you have, like if it's perennial rye or tall fescue. New lawns, though, gradually and naturally shift toward bent grasses and annual bluegrass. And it's the results of seeds being carried into your lawn, and you have a seed bank in your soil, and those seeds can come up. The end product is a climax lawn, and the climax lawn is perfectly suited to your site. This garden is a friend of mine. She has several acres and many garden beds, and she uses her lawn as a garden path throughout all these beds. And if you look closely at the lawn, you can see different colors of green. This means it's a climax lawn. It looks green, it looks lovely, it does its purpose. So there are 3 primary cultural practices for a lawn: mowing, fertilization, and irrigation. It's like a 3-legged stool. They are all equally important, and we'll talk about them. But first, look at this lawn. See all the different colors? Again, that means it's a climax lawn. But look how lovely it is against all those shrubs. First leg, mowing your lawn. The general rule is to never remove more than 1/3 of the leaf blade at any one time. So if you're maintaining your lawn at 2 inches high, don't let it get taller than 3 inches before you mow, or you could run the result of scalping your lawn. Also, maintaining your lawn using the 1/3 rule translates into mowing your lawn weekly during peak seasons of peak growing. During the winter months, an occasional mowing might be needed to keep the turf upright and to remove debris. Oops, sorry. So mowing your lawn. The key to mowing is to mow high, mow often. Mow high means you have taller blades and they grow deeper roots, which increases drought resistance. And see in the graphic on the right-hand side how deep the roots are and how high the grass is. If you cut too low, then you have shorter roots. And so the root growth stops when the plant focuses on building back the shoot, back up. So if you had tall fescue grass, you would set your mower blades to mow at 2 to 3 inches, 1 to 5 to 2.5 inches for fine fescue and perennial rye. And you mow your grass, bent grass, at 1.5 inches. Sharp blades prevent tearing your lawn, so you don't end up with this horrible picture. A mulching mower returns nutrients to lawns. So when you mulch with a mower, then the clippings lay on the lawn rather than taking them away in a bag. If you have wet clippings, mow them once again, or pick them up and put them in your compost bin. Mower wheels and foot traffic can compact soil and form ruts. And you can see that in this picture. See those long lines? That's the mower wheel. So the ideal is to change your mowing pattern each time. In a month, you would mow 4 different ways. So the first week, you would mow this way. The second week, you would mow this way. The third week, you would mow diagonally this way. Oops. And the fourth week, you would mow that way. So you have 4 times, and that way you don't have the ruts. You usually see ruts in parking strips. So thatching is that layer between the roots and the green stuff. It's the scruffy part in between. You have some living and some dead in there. Microbes can break down thatch unless it gets too thick. What causes thatch is drought, a low pH, and anaerobic conditions. Anaerobic means without oxygen. It's too thick, so air and gas can't move, nor can water. So you can use a thatching rake or mower with tines on it. Time to dethatch is in spring and fall. Grass cycling or using a mulching mower does not induce thatch. There's another way to add aeration to your lawn, and it's called plugging. And that's where you use a tool and you bring up these plugs that are about 2 inches long and they lay on top of the grass. You can rake them up, put them in your compost. Basically, thatching removes scruff from your lawn. This is the second leg of the stool, fertilizing. This is really a neat graphic because you show what nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium affects which part of the plant. So nitrogen is part of the chlorophyll molecule, which gives plant their green color and is involved in creating food for the plant through photosynthesis. So basically, it affects the parts of the plant that are above ground. Phosphorus promotes root growth and winter hardiness, and that affects the roots, the plant part of the plant below ground. Potassium is associated with the movement of water, nutrients, and carbohydrates in the plant tissue. So it's the all-around health of the plant. Grass needs nitrogen above any others. Local soil is seldom deficient in phosphorus and potassium, so nitrogen alone should be sufficient. You want to fertilize during periods of active growth so that nitrogen is not lost and is used. A May application feeds the top growth of your lawn, and a September application feeds root development. Healthy green shoots feed and grow roots. That's why you want a green lawn. You can get away with less fertilizer, but the trade-off will be more weeds. So high needs for fertilization with perennial rye, you would do it 2 to 4 times a year. Fescue needs a medium application of 1 to 3 times a year. And bentgrass needs a low application, maybe 2 times a year. If you're using chopped grass from a mulching mower, then you can use fewer amounts of application. It's a personal choice between organic and synthetic fertilizer. So synthetic fertilizer, which is on the left, the first number is always nitrogen, the second number is always phosphorus, and the third number is always potassium. But see how high the nitrogen ratio is? And in the organic, it's 9:3:5, so only 9 parts nitrogen compared to phosphorus and potassium. So several applications at a lower rate trumps a higher rate all at once, especially when using a water-soluble type, because you're feeding more gradually rather than just dumping the fertilizer onto your lawn. The third leg is watering your lawn. The rule of thumb is 1 inch per week of water. And if you have rain, then that counts as part of the inch. The frequency is to promote deep roots. So water enough to allow deep penetration. You can check this with a screwdriver. What you do is you take a screwdriver, jam it into your sod to where you think the roots are. And then if you pull the screwdriver out, if the screwdriver is wet, then you're watering enough. So active monitoring during active growing season. So what works for you in June, and we might still have rain in June, is not the same working regimen that you would use in our dry months, July, August, and September. You always have the option of summer dormancy, meaning you don't need to water your lawn. You can let it grow brown. Brown does not mean it's dead. It means it's dormant. And then with the fall rains, then your lawn will green back up again. Dr. Ala Kowalewski is a lawn professor at Oregon State, and he said, as far as watering your lawn, twice as much is not twice as good, because what you can do is leach pesticides and herbicides, and fertilizers from your garden, from your lawn, and it's a waste of money and water. What about moss in your lawn? There are really 3 conditions why you have moss in your lawn: acidic soil, compacted soil, and excess thatch or too much shade. So you will always have, if you have a mossy lawn, you will always have a mossy lawn until you change those conditions. So a soil test can confirm if their pH needs to be adjusted. Liming your soil to maintain the soil pH between 6.0 to 6.5 will benefit turf grass in the long run by improving the soil's ability to maintain adequate nutrient levels. Compacted soil can be changed. Well, it's also caused by damp soil and lack of drainage. So if you amend with compost or improve drainage, that might take care of that problem. And aerating the soil can help, but probably you need to trim back your shrubbery and your trees so that more sunlight gets to that lawn. Lawn needs full sun to grow healthy. So if you have moss, something else is going on. I'm landscape chair for our HOA, and I developed this spreadsheet so that I can remember what's supposed to happen during the month year-round. And also I can work with the crew and what to do at certain times. So we mow and edge the lawns weekly. We control moss. We dethatch if it's needed. Prune spring shrubs in March and April. Clean up weeds and pests every time, every week. And in April, I added one for myself. Visit nurseries to get ideas, look for annuals. Maybe not this, might be too early this month, maybe next month. But if you have a schedule, then you can anticipate and plan how to monitor your garden. And lastly, we're going to talk about slugs and snails. So slugs and snails predate humans by 260 to 350 million years. Agriculture began about 12,000 years ago, and then the battle between slugs and snails and humans began until today. According to the Oregon Department of Agriculture, there are 124 terrestrial slugs and snails in Oregon. It's easier to get rid of a pest when you understand it, its habits, and its lifestyles. It's important to remember that slugs and snails eat 30 to 40 times their weight every day. All land slugs and snails are hermaphrodites. That means that each have the male and female organs. That means that after mating, each can become pregnant and lay eggs. Most slugs and snails hatch in the spring once the soil warms up. And that's because there was a frenzy of mating back in the fall. And then the eggs wait until the soil is warm enough for those babies to be born. Slugs lay eggs in batches of 3 to 40 in a batch beneath moist soil, under containers, in debris, and other protected areas. A slug can lay 30 to 40 eggs per batch, and they can lay up to 400 eggs a year each. And the slugs usually live 1 to 2 years. Snails can lay up to 80 eggs at a time and about 6 batches a year. And a snail can lay up to 500 eggs a year, and they can live 4 to 6 years. So how do we control these guys? There's one study that for every slug caught by Pacific Northwest gardeners, 20 are hiding. So cultural and physical controls, there's several things that you can do to lessen their impact. Slugs and snails love tender, succulent leaves. So choosing plants with leathery, stiff, or aromatic leaves can lessen the trouble you're going to have. Generally, native plants are resistant. Most woody plants and ornamental grasses are quite resistant. You want to water in the morning because best garden practice anyway, but by the afternoon, the soil will be dry. And then in evening, the soil is just really uncomfortable for the slugs and the snails. Keep your garden beds free of debris so that the slugs and snails don't have a place to hide or lay eggs. There's many natural predators that love to eat these guys. We have toads, snakes, beetles, marsh flies, birds, frogs, foxes, salamanders, newts, ducks, millipedes, porcupines, raccoons, and chickens. And then for trapping and exclusion by barriers, you can use a beer trap, copper strips, copper mesh, now commercial baits. Metaldehyde causes the destruction of the mucus production abilities, which is crucial to a slug and snail's life. Slugs and snails are the same creature, it's just that snails have a shell. So without mucus, slugs and snails cannot move. They have a hard time digesting, and it promotes dehydration. Slugs and snails cover their bodies with mucus, so without that mucus covering, they die in the sun. It's not recommended around edible crops. It's harmful, very harmful, to dogs, cats, birds, and fish. You must read the label. Metaldehyde will be listed as the first ingredient on the list of ingredients on the package. The other product is an iron phosphate product, and it will be the first ingredient on the package. So iron phosphate is safe to use around pets, humans, birds, fish, beneficial insects, and mammals. And you can use it around food and berry crops until harvest day. And the way that it works, it interferes with the calcium metabolism in their gut. So they feel full. So they don't eat. And then they die of starvation in 3 to 6 days. The whole point is they've stopped eating. If they come in little white pellets, and so as you scatter them about, if those little white pellets, which are iron phosphate, are not eaten by the slug or snail, then it becomes a soil nutrient. Thank you for coming, and happy spring gardening. I had some slides with information on areas that you can go and get more information, but I'm going to run through some of the handouts I used while we talk about this stuff. And this will be on the recording later in a couple of days. If you go to the 10-Minute University, you can get all sorts of information. We have over 50 handouts, and every list that I have on here is from the 10-Minute University.
Okay, Laura, thank you so much for that really comprehensive list of things we need to consider when we're doing our gardening this season. I've got my list ready to go. We did have a couple of questions I wanted to go over. First one is, we had a attendee who had planted 2 lemon drop shrubs, watered them in well, put mulch on, added mycorrhizae, and they still died. Do you have any ideas?
What's a lemon drop plant?
I was hoping you would know that. I think Sherry said it was, I don't know, I'd have to go back into the questions. But
generally,
any plant that you put in, you water it, You do
But
all
one of the
all
things
the
I would
things.
ask or think about is if they are planted right together. If they are planted separately, then that means something is different is happening. You always can get a plant that wasn't healthy and it's not your fault, which is what I like. But you could go back, if a plant that didn't survive or just is not thriving, dig it up and see what's happening with the roots. Often the roots are damaged, or I was working with one client and I pulled up the plant and there were no roots at all. They had been eaten by something. And also check to see if the growing conditions are the same. For example, if you bought a sun plant and accidentally planted the second plant in shade, maybe it's not getting enough shade, sun to thrive, or it's just not happy and it just stops growing because it needs that sun for growth.
Okay, so basically look at, where it's planted, how it's planted, if something is attacking it.
And watering conditions can really make a difference if one plant is drowning. For example, rhododendron and azaleas do not look, and Daphne do not like wet feet. So when I plant them, I usually plant them above, half in the ground and half out of the ground, the root ball. Then I put native soil around it. But that way, the roots aren't sitting in wet water.
I would imagine that would be particularly important in our heavy clay soils.
Right,
To take
right.
care of that. Okay, let's go on to compost. One of the concerns is that if you're creating your own compost at home, doesn't that attract rats?
Not if you don't put food scraps in them.
Okay, so just regular garden stuff without being like vegetables or fruit that have fallen
Right.
from a tree and
That's
also
what
you gotta
they're
separate that
attracted to
out.
the scent, especially if you put meat in there or meat bones. That's really a no-no.
Yeah,
You can put food scraps if if your garbage company has a green bin, we call it a compost bin, where it's taken away each week. I would be really hesitant to put food scraps in my home compost system
what
because of
if
the
you
rat
have one
problem.
of like a closed container or something?
Those
Like if
work
I have
really well.
a big
You have to
drum
be
that
really
I
careful that with a roller,
yeah.
it doesn't get too wet because
Mm,
it can go anaerobic really quick. And the way you can tell anaerobic is because it smells like rotten eggs.
okay.
There's another one, just a plain black one, and you fill it from the bottom, and then you fill it from the top and open it up at the bottom and dig it out.
Uh-huh.
And unless you put that on compost, rats will dig under and come up in, or mice or voles.
So you need to put it on like concrete or something. You said compost, but put it on concrete or yeah.
Correct. Thank you.
Or I've often used like a hardware cloth kind of thing when I'm like in my greenhouse to keep, with very fine mesh to keep.
Yeah, and that would be good too, because then water can drain out.
Yeah.
That's really important.
Okay. Um, question about dahlias. Do they have to be dug up every year or can they be left in the ground?
It
What
depends
you're
on your
thinking.
soil.
Okay.
It depends on how much clay you have, how much good drainage you have. What kills dahlia bulbs most is being wet and cold. If you lift them, then you have the opportunity to take away parts of the bulb that aren't thriving, that maybe have damage or insect or pesticide pests. And you also can separate them, and so you have more dahlias.
Mhm.
And the key, if you do that, is to label them so you know what you have.
How do you
A
know that,
nice way
Laura?
to keep them. A nice way to keep them is to have them in kind of wet sawdust,
Mhm.
so they can stay kind of moist but not soggy at all. And then take them out. And if you have a soil thermometer, you can put them in the ground when it's about 50 degrees and above.
I
They
remember
do not like cold soil.
I remember at the spring garden fair a couple of years ago, I was at the dahlia display and saying, so when do I plant the dahlias? And they said, mid-May is usually golden. And because I always want to get out there and get them going. And it's kind of like with tomato plants. It's like just wait. You don't want to torture your
It's so
plants, right?
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. If you've got a raised bed and you want to put compost in it, can you just put it on top? Do you still need to dig it in? You know,
You dig it in with a spade. Again, you don't want to destroy the soil texture so that you have the water and air pores. And you would dig it in just like a garden bed.
okay. That's about all the questions that I think we're really pressing. Sherry and Cheryl did a great job of answering as they were
Oh,
going
good.
along. So thank you so much. And we encourage everybody to come next week when we're going to be talking more about raised garden beds. Whole webinar on that, so you'll get more of your questions answered. And if you have any questions that weren't answered or that you think of later, you can go to our Master Gardener helpline, cmastergardeners.org, and go in there and you can ask questions. If you can send pictures, it's really helpful. And then we can take a look and answer your questions via email. You can also call. So that looks great. And thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
Pleasure listening to you.
Thank you.
Take care.